everybody. Thank you so much for watching this Latina Superhero panel. My name is Nelly Castillo. I'm the co-founder of Vendetta Entertainment, a woman of color and diversity-focused company. So check us out at vendettaexperience.com. And thank you, Kayden Phoenix. I'm going to make some introductions of our wonderful panelists. So first we have Kayden Phoenix. So she's the founder of Phoenix Studios and the creative writer of the Latina Superhero series, A la Brava. She aims to create a superhero mindset in every marginalized individual, regardless of age, demographic, socioeconomic class. And then we have Miss Amanda Julina. Please raise your hand so people can see you as I'm reading this. She's the illustrator of Jalisco, Latina Superhero. She's an animator and voiceover artist. She's originally from New Mexico. Beyond her comic work with Jalisco and Ruca, she has worked on several indie projects, including Magical Girl Friendship Squad, The Boarding House Reach, and was recently hired onto the development team at Wicked Saints Studio. Okay, let's continue. And then we have Miss Barbra. Just say hi, Barbra, so people can see you. And your icon gets animated. Can we see you there? Perfect. So Barbra Dillon is a co-founder and editor-in-chief of Fanbase Press, an Eisner Award-nominated publishing company that seeks to produce new and distinctive works that give voice to the themes, ideals, and people that make geekdom so exceptional. She's also the director of marketing operations for Gemelli. Did I say that right, Barbra?
You did, yes.
Okay, Gemelli Biotech, as well as a voiceover actress with credits, including the Katniss Chronicles and Pendant Audio's Phantom Canyon, Clara. Very good. And now we have Mr. Ralph Henriquez, writer-creator. Hello, Ralph.
Hi, everybody.
Hello. Ralph is a graduate of the School of Visual Arts in New York City with a bachelor's degrees in animation and certificate in 3D animation from New York University. He began his career as a visual effects artist for short films. He then moved into producing and directing his very short film titled Fuerza, about Puerto Rican woman who becomes a superheroine and fights against dangerous villains looking to cause destructions across New York City. He went on to produce other feature films, including Standoff and Dirty Shield, which won awards in various national film festivals. Congrats on that. And then we have Mr. Edgardo Miranda-Rodriguez. Where are you, Edgardo? Can you say hi, please, for everybody?
Hi, please, for everybody.
Edgardo Miranda is the founder of his design studio, Somos Arte, and creator and writer of the critically acclaimed comic book La Boriqueña. He's also the co-founder of the graphic novel publishing company Daryl Makes Comics with his business partner Daryl DMC. Is it McDaniels?
Yep.
Via Somos Arte, he has a roster of clients that includes Marvel, Atlantic Records, Columbia University, Meredith Hispanic Ventures, and various Latino nonprofits like Aspira of New York, El Puente, and the Caribbean Cultural Center African Diaspora Institute. Edgardo was the artistic director of Pa'lante Siempre Pa'lante, part of the acclaimed PBS POV documentary series, which received the Silver Apple Award from the National Media Alliance. Congratulations on that. Okay, so welcome. Felicidades a todos por los logros. Let's get right into it. So we're talking about the Latina superhero and the Latinx representation in the comic world. So I would like to start with Kayden, and then just to kick off with you, Kayden, where are we seeing the Latina superheroes and where are they going right now?
It's actually going really forward. It's going forward kind of fast and kind of not. So like Zorro got greenlit. So there's going to be a female Zorro coming up, and that's Barbra Rodriguez is backing it. And Sophia is backing it as well. And so like that just got announced a few months ago. The Wonder Girl for CW got announced a couple months ago. Last week, they announced that they they shelved it, which is unfortunate, but like we had 2 going on as TV shows, which is really cool. Now we have 1 going as TV shows. Obviously we're comics, we live in the comic world, but we have La Boriqueña. Like Boriqueña's been around, he's going on his 3rd or his 4th issue. Like he's amazing. Edgardo's amazing. Barbra has Quince, right? Like Eisner nominated, Eisner winning, you know, like Fuerza has been around as well. Amanda and I are a little bit newer, we just started like a year and a half ago, but you know, like it's going, and like that's the whole point of it. From what I see within the social media and like the articles that I read, it is getting known, as it is being seen. So that's what I say.
Okay, so now when we say it is going, right?
Yeah.
We say it is going. Is that something that we should accept right now as filmmakers, Latinx comic creators? What else should we do besides the accolades? Because here is my question. I read all of your bios, I see your work, and I'm like, well, one project got shelved. So what is it that we need to do for, say, bigger companies to really see the investment in a Latina or Latinx comic? Can anybody answer that, or kind of like, pick on your brain? Sorry, Edgardo, go for it.
Well, we live in 2021 where over the last 10 years, easily, when you're talking about superhero culture, unfortunately, it's synonymous or it is immediately associated with cinema or television. When the superhero genre and its print form is an art form that's been around for close to 100 years, with the longest successful running superhero series, Superman, just over 80 years. So oftentimes, I personally, I'll speak for myself, I think it's a little presumptuous sometimes when people automatically say, so when's the movie coming out? Are you working on a movie? It's like being a bodeguero. You know, you have your little bodega on the corner and somebody's asking you, so when are you going to open up your chain of supermarkets? And you're like, I'm focused on my immediate community. So as a publisher, an independent publisher, right? I focus on my immediate community, you know, which is Latinx communities across the United States, and mostly in metropolitan areas, universities and schools that are teaching my books. And that is something that has given us a level of sustainability and success so that we can continue to publish. And we've also been able to set our own publishing schedules. We don't have a schedule that competes with the big 2 in publishing. So when I first broke into comics, people were telling me, you know, you got to start making comic books every month. And maybe in the next 5 to 7 years, that's when you'll finally break even. And I'm like, Chacho, déjate con todo eso. I'm like, why issue if that's the case, you know?
Yeah.
So I'm like, no, we can't compete. You know, and I think it's the Latinx model that has existed for, you know, for decades in this country, in that there's always been a sense of entrepreneurism in our communities, whether it's a food truck, whether it's a corner store, whether it's a seamster. We've always had a sense of, even though there are mainstream communities and mainstream businesses, we've always been able to say, you know what, but our community needs a tailor. Our community needs a restaurant. Our community needs X, Y, and Z. So I think what you've seen in the last few years is comic book publishers saying, our community needs comic books. We need our own comic books. And now, you know, we can't, you know, I'm not gonna sit here and say, well, the studios need to and the studios need to. I don't know anyone in the studios. All I know, the majority of the people in those studios are old white men that have had their positions for decades. You know, and you know, of course, I will honestly say I do get inquiries and studios do approach us. They don't understand us. They really have no idea. You know, when all the time when studios are looking for a Latinx superhero, what they really mean is they're looking for Batgirl, who happens to be Cubana. They're looking for Spider-Girl, who happens to be Chicana. They're looking for Wonder Woman, who happens to be Brazilian. They don't understand that we can be, you can have a Chicana superhero or a Puerto Rican superhero, and that still is a universal story. There's like, oh no, she's Puerto Rican, and then only Puerto Ricans are gonna understand her. I'm like, really? So you're telling me that we've been making salsa music, so you only see Puerto Ricans dancing to salsa? Or we've been making reggaeton, you only see Puerto Ricans dancing to reggaeton? That's nonsense. Reggaeton right now is huge in Colombia. How do you explain that? You see what I'm saying? So I look at it as, this is what I work on. I work on comic books because I can afford to make comic books. You know, I publish my comic books, you know, every few years because that's what I can afford. I can't afford a multi-billion-dollar film or even a film that's going to be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's just completely unrealistic. And if the opportunity presents itself in the future, then that's somebody approaching us. But with my resources, I'm running my little bodega on the corner so that everybody in my barrio has everything they need when they come to the store.
Right. But I'd like to, you know, just to bring accountability, because the fact that somebody says, well, I do not understand the culture, therefore I'm not going to invest in that project or that creator, right? What companies are we talking about? The two big companies. What are those? Can you tell us which those are?
Anybody else?
You mean Marvel and DC? Is that where you're referring to?
Marvel
Yes.
and DC, correct. So, and I understand that running your own bodega, definitely that has, you know, its own value, and it's like being a superhero yourself, right? So Barbara, sorry to point out to you, and you're holding a baby while discussing this hard topic. But what do you think it is, right? From your perspective, from your work, from your company, what do you think it is? How can we kind of like close the gap in that bridge? Because I want to learn more about comic creators, and thanks to Kayden, who reached out to me last year, I was able to learn a bit more. I'm in touch with Amanda, Mireille, you know, some of them now, these wonderful people. So how can we close that bridge?
Absolutely. So that's a great question. And first and foremost, I want to say to all of my panelists and to the viewers out there, thank you for your patience while I have a little one with me. Pandemic times make for interesting times. So I appreciate your patience. But I think that's a great question because with the big two, and to Edgardo's wonderful point, given the infrastructure that's currently in place in Hollywood in terms of TV and film, there are so many barriers in place that are so challenging to break down in terms of getting more inclusivity in terms of not only characters, but the creative teams bringing those characters to life, whether they are inclusive characters that those creators are telling, or having more inclusive creative teams telling a Captain America story, like Ta-Nehisi Coates a few years ago finally got to tell a Captain America story. But it is so challenging to break down those barriers and to make that possible because the folks at the top, whether it's Hollywood, whether it's publishing at the big two, unfortunately, are majoritively older white men who have been in place for quite a while. So it's about getting more inclusivity from the top down. And modeling that behavior and modeling that inclusivity in terms of the stories that you're telling, the creators that you're working with. And that's why, little one, and that's why with Fanbase Press, our publishing company, that's our mission. Our mission is to be inclusive in all regards and to provide opportunities to have impactful stories with resonating characters that appeal to everyone of different age groups, of different nationalities, backgrounds, different physical and neural abilities. I mean, we want to be speaking to everyone because everyone deserves these stories. And I think to Edgardo's point again, I think that it's important to remember and understand that there are a lot of creators and folks who are pounding the pavement every single day, like everyone on this panel, trying to make these stories happen and trying to make them work. We all know how hard it is when you're standing at a convention table and you just spent like 2 years putting together a comic or graphic novel, and a customer may come up to you and say, so what are you working on next? And you're like, well, I just spent 2 years working on this, but I'll get right on that. And I think it's the same for TV and film, that there are honestly a lot of inclusive stories that are in the works, but it takes so long in the Hollywood funnel, as it were, to get these stories actually to print or to screen. So it's really challenging to sometimes be involved with that and know, like, hey, I want to shout from the rooftops that this is going to happen, but we can't yet. So, but I think in terms of accountability, I'm sorry I'm going on for so long, but I think in terms of accountability, we really just need to, like Edgardo said, we need to all keep pounding the pavement And it's great that there is this drive, this desire from audiences, mainstream audiences for it, because that means they are holding us accountable. They are the ones saying, we want to see this. And not only we as creators and we as publishers, but the folks at the top in studios and the folks at the top at publishers need to be held accountable as well.
Thank you for that, Barbara. Yes.
If I may. So I come from a background of film and animation. And one of the things that, back in class in college was the big two. The big two is always what inspired, most of my animator friends to be creative and what have you. And our professors always say, well, create something that hasn't been created. So the first thing was, okay, back then, there wasn't many superheroines to begin with. It was only like Batgirl, Wonder Woman, and Supergirl, and nothing really more. And then you had your Marvel, but it was a very, very small handful. And then lo and behold, none of them were Latina. So my whole thought was, a Latina superheroine. So I started to create, Fuerza, and which she wasn't called Fuerza back in the day, but she evolved over the years to where she's at today. And I've had, numerous inquiries about making her into a film, but like you said, you want to make sure that she's the characters are represented in the right way. You don't want to give a project over and all of a sudden it becomes something that's totally different than what's originally created. So, imagine, La Boriqueña looking like, some, white blonde girl. It's not Latina. That just won't that wouldn't fly. It just wouldn't fly. And the same for any one of the other characters. It just wouldn't fly. And it's not respected. In my opinion, it's not respected. And there was a time where I had I was approached to have Fuerza produced, but it was a totally different mindset as to what the character was, to what they wanted to do, and it wasn't on the same level. And I was like, this is not going to work.
What do you mean when you say mindset?
Mindset is a formula. They have they want to put a Zoe Saldana, in place. I'm like, no, my character doesn't look like Zoe. I love Zoe. I love Rosario. I love Gina Torres, but the character does not look like that. I can create characters that could reflect these, actresses, and we hit the ground running, but it's not the same. And I don't think we were respected that way, in that manner. So yeah, yes, accountability, but we also have to hold them accountable to say, hey, take it seriously. This is how they carry it, and don't have a preconceived notion about what you think the characters are. Ask us, we'll tell you, and let's work together. And I think we're starting to get there. We're starting to get there little by little, because we have everybody here creating something, and it's amazing. We have to keep on, like I said, pounding that pavement.
I do want to add one thing also to keep it in the context, since we obviously just moved into the discussion of media, which is obviously specific to television and film. One thing that has to be clearly understood, for those that don't, this is not conversation for us, but for those listening to this conversation, is Marvel Studios is owned by Disney. DC Comics is owned by Warner Brothers. They have a staff of writers, editors, illustrators that all work for this larger mega billion-dollar corporation.
Correct.
All of this IP, all of these intellectual properties that they've had that have been around for decades. In the case of collectively almost like close to 80 years each one. They've had their IP for years, and we're talking about thousands of characters, not just the ones we've seen. There's an abundance of characters, right? When you have independent artists like us, storytellers like us, and a studio approaches us, they're going to buy our intellectual property. Also, from my experience, let me just speak from my experience. They're going to take over the intellectual property. It's a completely different situation. You will probably negotiate in a good deal to have a creator credit when the credits roll up. Pero the comic book is the only thing that is really originally yours. Anything that happens from that anything that happens beyond that comic book now belongs to the studio that owns that intellectual property. I'll give you an example. My good friend Ronald Wimberly produced a an amazing award-winning graphic novel called Prince of Cats. And it's an African-American 1980s Brooklyn version of Romeo and Juliet. And he's had this graphic novel for close to 10 years now, and he owns it. So it was originally published by Vertigo, which is an imprint under DC Comics under Warner Brothers, but he owned that property. So he was able to take that to another company and they reprint it. Mind you, we're still talking about the comic book, right? Now, 2 years ago, Spike Lee and another studio approached him. Well, rather, the studio approached him and they said, we want to attach Spike Lee to this property. And he was put into a unique position where he's brought in as a writer, which is very unique. He's actually being brought in as a screenwriter for this film. But he told me straight up, he was like, look, nothing's ever going to change my comic book. My comic book in its purest form is what my story originally was. This film, that's not my thing. I may write the screenplay, but that's really not mine anymore. It's not. And he was that's like as honest as you can be about it. You know what I mean? As much as Stan Lee signed T-shirts and comic books and movie posters at events, as long as he was alive, may he rest in peace, he didn't own any of those characters. He didn't. Yeah. You know, so when we're as independent storytellers, when we do have those opportunities, we have to be ready to say how much of this, if not all of this IP, are we willing to just say, go ahead, take it away.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the reality. And I created a character called La Boriqueña. That's not even an original name that I came up with. That's the literal Taino name of the island of Puerto Rico, Borinque, and the name of our national anthem. So I created a philanthropic project to give back to nonprofits in Puerto Rico because I consider that my licensing fee for creating a character called La Boriqueña. So how could I also think of selling La Boriqueña to a major corporate studio? The whole concept of Puerto Rico being a colony and La Boriqueña being an independent comic book, well, there's almost like a real kind of conversation happening there. And you sell this intellectual property. You see what I'm saying? It defies the whole purpose of this character beginning. So I think a lot of us created these characters and they represent so much of our heritage, so much of our experience. And when you sell that, well, you're selling something that's theirs now. You know, Jalisco, Quince said these are not intellectual properties that are based on fantastical worlds and cities and universes. These are actually based on real experiences, real towns, real vernacular, real idiom. This isn't Thanos and Guardian of the Galaxy and a whole of the universe. This is real. And I think that's also one of the things that sets us apart as Latinx storytellers. We tell stories from our experience. Why? Because no one else is telling stories. And when you do see Latin superheroes in Marvel and DC, they're not speaking from a real Latin experience. The new Wonder Girl that was just introduced, and it's ironic that, you know, it got shelved just as quickly as it was announced. Like they announced they're making a new comic book about Wonder Woman in the future. She happens to be Latina and she's Brazilian. The comic book hadn't even come out yet. All of a sudden she got a TV deal. Why? Because Warner Brothers owns this intellectual property. This is all being like fast tracked before we see it. But then why did it get shelved? That's the real question. With all this power behind Warner Brothers and all of this ideas, it still gets shelved. Why? Because Hollywood studios still see our properties as risky. Are people really gonna buy tickets to go see this movie? Are they really gonna watch this? And it's mind-boggling, right? Because the Latinx buying power in the United States is $1.9 trillion. You know,
the highest percentage.
That's higher than the GDP of Mexico, of Australia, and we consume overwhelmingly more than what we actually see ourselves with. You know, that's like someone buying milk all the time, even though they're lactose intolerant, but they're still buying the milk. Like we constantly consume all this content that looks nothing like us, let alone even speaks like us.
Es una locura. But thank you for that, guys. But I guess my next question, I have several questions right now, but my next question is, what can we follow certain recipes or certain, you know, examples? And I'm just thinking of Black Panther. I'm thinking of Black Panther, right? What do you guys think about that? Because prior to that movie, let's talk about. I want to hear it.
No, honestly, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but there really isn't a conversation about Black Panther because Black Panther is a part of $1 billion corporation, and this is part of their like 10, 20-year plan. Black Panther wasn't just like, oh wow, Black Panther just came out. Black Panther's been a character that's been around since the late 1960s. And,
Right.
and it's been seen in different forms. So when Marvel was developing this studio, this is just part of their roster, their slate. So I think in all fairness, for this conversation, I think we should really talk more about our own IP, how we've been able to develop this IP. Because I don't want to talk about Black Panther. I
No.
want to talk about Jalisco. I want to talk about
Edgardo.
Fuerza. I want to talk about Quince.
No te voy a forzar a hablar de Black Panther, but just,
it's not a besmirch on the Black community, because the Black Panther movie is incredibly powerful, inspiring. But I don't want to talk about Superman. I don't want to talk about Batman. I don't want to talk about Wonder Woman. I want to talk about our stories. This is our panel about Latina superheroes.
But as an ignorant of the comic world, and I have to say it, I'm an ignorant, I'm learning, guys, right? And as a filmmaker, as the owner of a production company, I have to tell you, that movie for me was like, kind of like yes, people of color, stories like that can be profitable as a business owner. Okay. And please excuse my ignorance. I'm totally learning from
you guys. It's not about that. No, that's I don't
okay.
want to. But Kayden, I think Kayden has a good answer for this.
Nelly, you are correct. Black Panther did do amazing, right? And before that, we had Crazy Rich Asians, which also did very amazing. Not superhero, but still proves the point that we can sell in theaters, right? Marginalized sell in theaters. That does prove the point. But like to Edgardo's point, that was Marvel. That's Disney. If I had $100 million, if Edgardo had $100 million and Barbra Dillon, we will make Quince. We would make our movies, and it would probably do well because we throw a lot behind the marketing. That's right. Like we honestly put aside, we can do that. But do I have $100 million? Do I have $200 million? No, I have no million. So that is one point. There is the difference in regards to that, the backing behind it. Are all my Jalisco's and Santas in every comic book store across the whole United States, across the world? No, I'm not Marvel. I don't have that power. I don't have that money behind me, but I don't have that power as of yet. So that is it's a different, like we are indie, we are not studio. So there's a big separation. But to your point, does that a good comp? Is it a good comparison being like, hey, look what Black Panther did, right? And they're 19% of the United States. Latinas are 20% of the United States. We buy 1 in 4 tickets in all movies back when we had movie theater, So imagine if you did one for a Latina, right? So that is a good comp, same, so that is a good point for people that doesn't necessarily know the difference between a studio and an independent film, or, so yes, it is a very good point, and it's a very good progress back in the day, like it's still a progression. We still have to fight, no matter what, we're always fighting. But it is a good thing.
Amanda, we want to hear you. So, pobrecita Amanda está ahí tomando su café. Amanda, as a Latina and a creator. So there's one thing that resonates to me, guys, and it's integrity of our stories, right? That integrity that speaks to our people. Where do you find that inspiration? Where do you center yourself, like saying, oh my God, perhaps this is hard and I have to plan myself to like make a living and the pandemic, all of this, and keep on creating. So how do you do that?
Well, I was hired by the Huntington Beach Public Library a year ago, and I still haven't gotten my start date. So that was the plan.
Yeah, girl.
As someone who's fully freelance, working with Kayden has been, amazing. And I pumped Jalisco out when I was still in school, and I'm working on Ruca now, and I have other projects going on at the same time. So I guess it's kind of like, I guess, like, are you asking like in a creative sense?
Yes, in a creative sense.
Yeah, I mean, like whenever we prep for a project, Kayden and I, like, we have tons of mood boards. We go by mood boards. We do our research. I mean, like, I've never been to Mexico. I am Mexican, but I'm from New Mexico, and I've never had the opportunity to, to travel. So for Jalisco, I mean, when I designed her, I just kind of like, I went off of what I was frustrated with, and in a design sense, I often tend to design characters in a way where like I try to give them noses. I don't want them to have, like the swoop nose and the very soft rat, like I gave her cheekbones. Like I always try to just like, I guess, reflect what I want to see, even if it's not necessarily like what is popular in media or what particularly is, you know, favorited by media. So I guess in character design, that's something that I've encountered a lot and thought about a lot. And just in terms of like preparing for Ruca, which is the graphic novel I'm working on right now with Kayden, it's East LA and I moved to California a couple years back. So experiencing like LA life and just kind of, you know, like a lot of my peers when I was in art school are Chicana, and just kind of like in a research sense, just research sense, we do a lot of mood boards. I don't know.
So
But
no,
really,
for example, so Amanda, what would you tell somebody, you know, and for example, my daughter is getting into drawing, my mom is a painter, and it's like, you know, so what would you suggest to young people who want to do what you do, right? They look at your work, they're like, well, aesthetically, it's beautiful, you know, there's a lot of things, but what would you tell them? So where do you start?
yeah, okay, yeah. Well, it's funny, I didn't really find my artistic voice until I left New Mexico. And then once I left New Mexico, all of my art started being about New Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, I realized something that was absolutely important to me. And I couldn't really see it until I left, which was important for my artistic journey. But I mean, I guess that's kind of where my center is, which is like all of my stories stem from growing up there and my family, and, you know, like just kind of how that created my identity in ways that I wasn't able to really see until I got older. But I guess, yeah, I think that's just so important to have, is just kind of knowing where your voice comes from and what's important. Like just, I don't know, like I'm so creatively inspired whenever I look through old photos, whenever I talk to my family. Like that's, I think, to me, just such a great way of kind of communicating yourself, right? Is just sort of centering on like, this is home, and that's where everything stems from. It's in like, the best art comes from authenticity, regardless of what format it's in.
So from the characters that you've developed, tell us a little bit more about specifics. So Jalisco Superhero, let's talk about her.
She's amazing. I mean, I was able to design most of the characters. Kayden had her dress in mind, which was amazing because I grew up with folklorico, but in a very, like, I didn't actually dance it until I was a lot older. So I never knew a lot about like the dresses and like the just so much of like the culture. I didn't know a lot of it. So Kayden was able to just really like show me in the design sense, like, you know, this is what a Jalisco dress looks like. This is, you know, there are different dresses per state. Like this is what the difference of the dances are. Yeah, so like being able to, you know, collaborate on that design was absolutely wonderful.
So for the people that don't know Jalisco Superhero, let's give them a little bit more of context. Kayden, who is she? What does she do? What weapons does she have? You know, all that good stuff.
So Jalisco dances folklorico, and she has blades coming out of her dress. So here's the little doll that just hangs out right here next to my laptop. But and the blades come out of the dress, and so they're little fake blades, and it's really Elena. But that's one of my dolls that I take with me to con. That's my other one over there. I'm looking at her. But that's it. So she uses her culture as her strength, and that is the backbone of it. That is her power. If she's not necessarily a superpower, because that is not a power, it's a skill that has blades. But at the same point, you know, that's still, still call her superhero. What it is about has to do with femicide. So her mom gets stolen at the very top, and she wants to find her mom. So you think of a reverse Taken, right? She wants to find and save her mom. That is literally the only thing she wants to do. So she sets out, and she does not know about the femicide going on, right? Because Mujeres de Juarez. It's a very sad thing. You know, obviously we have MMIW as well with the Native Americans. So that is the whole, and I'm going to go into details, but anyway, she gets saved by the Adelitas, which Amanda actually helped a lot with the Adelitas as well, because we did one band for Rocky, or for Della, we did two bands for Rocky, because she's the cuter one, she's softer, she needs more protection. So that stuff that Amanda did say, you know, like obviously I input that stuff. With Jalisco, I wanted a halter top because I like halter tops, you know, and I wanted the modern dress. So there's certain things we went back and forth in regards to the character design. But same thing, we listen to each other, we bounce off, you know, we say, okay, what's pretty, but what's also makes sense. at the same time. The black dress, my mom hated that I did a black dress, right? Because that's not Jalisco. It should be red. It should be pink. It should be any other color than black. But I grew up watching my mom wearing a black dress when she danced Jalisco. And so that's why I did a black dress. She had other colors as well. But that was my favorite one because I wear black, as you say. So that's the overall gist in regards to character design. She wants to save her mom. She ends up taking down the femicide in Mexico because the villain is in charge of the femicide. And so she ends up taking down the villain, who's called Malinche. That's it.
Ooh, that Malinche character, tremenda. Hernan Cortez actually established his house in Veracruz, Mexico, where I'm from. So there's a lot of spiritual and personal conflicts within myself about Malinche and all that colonization stuff. But let's hear about Fuerza. Ralph, thank you, ladies. And I just want to know, so Fuerza is a very strong word.
Mm-hmm. Very.
Right. So tell us about her. Can you paint her with descriptions and give us context about what she does and her superpowers?
Sure. So Fuerza, basically is that of strength. So I wanted to create a name or a character based on a word that people can recognize. Because when I was creating the character years ago, and the whole Hollywood thing was, well, if you create a character, Hollywood is not going to accept it because Latina and all that stuff, Latino and what have you. So when I created her, I wanted something that would be accepted all around. Now, we create, characters where, it's more acceptance, but that back then it wasn't acceptance. So I created her, and she is, if you want to do a comparison as a Captain Marvel style, strength, flight, invulnerability, but with a very strong family sense, because most stories back in the day had Latinos as drug dealers, drug users, anything less than. And my whole purpose was, I'm going to create a universe where Latinos are positive because we are cops, we are lawyers, we are soldiers. I'm a veteran myself. We are college professors, and we are positive. And that's what I created. I didn't emphasize, okay, I want to show you in your face, Latina, Latina, Latina. She is Latina, but she still could be accepted within, everyday life. So her story is, she got her powers stumbling across an extraterrestrial being that was found under Fort El Morro. So she stumbled upon it and she gained her powers that way. And she uses it to fight for good, the basic, your superhero story. And she is going up against another being as strong as her, who wants to allow its colony of parasites. And these parasites, they take over the bodies of human beings and they feed on their life forces. That is their food. So basically, it'll be an annihilation of Earth if this event happens. So that is my story.
Wow. So, and how did you design her physically? Because right now, we were touching on the typical look of Latina, brown skin, blah, 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 blah. What is the design and what was your inspiration into building her?
Inspiration was obviously a athletically built Latina. Mm-hmm. And in my family, I have a lot of Boriquas that are blonde hair, blue eyes. Yes. I also have the caramel. I also have my father's dark skin. So between my mom and my dad, I'm right in between. I'm caramel. So there is a wide variety of us. So I created, her, a lighter skin with an auburn hair, brown hair, and a physical, superhero. She's not, sexualizing everything, because I refuse to do that, to these characters. Mm-hmm. But she's attractive, and she does what she has to do. That's all there is to it. You know, again, I didn't go ahead and I don't want to write stories where I'm shoving the whole thing of her being Latina. You know, she's Latina. You know, her Nieves is, you know, her last name. Fuerza is her primary name. We don't need any more like shoving it down the throat, especially if you see images of her in Puerto Rico. It's there, it's done. So yes, folks, she's Latina, get over it.
Edgardo, can you add a little bit more into this? You know, that ideal of the Latina, and evidently Hollywood has had a piece in it reflecting this is what Latinos should look like, right? Tienen que ser morenos, dark hair, and all that. So can you tell us a little bit that, was that a struggle within your creation of your character, La Boriqueña?
Well, I think if we're going to talk about Hollywood, we have to be honest about ourselves, because Latin media perpetuates Eurocentric standards of beauty as well. If we look at telenovelas that we all grew up on, if we look at, you know, newscasters, news anchors that we all grew up on and still see today, the majority of them are very blonde, blue-eyed, you know, white standards of beauty. And when we see, you know, Afro-Latinx or Mestizo, oftentimes in the telenovela, we are never the protagonists. You know, we're in the background, the criadas, the chauffeurs, the lo que sea. Literally the background players. See that guy just walking by me? You know, ahí viene negro. He's just walking through the background, you know? And, you know, for some time, Hollywood pretty much reflected that as well, that if a person of Latin heritage was going to be on screen, they needed to not look, well, the thing is, like, we're Latin, we're actually, there's no racial description of us, because we are all races.
Correct.
We're African, we're indigenous, we're Asian, we're European, and some of us have a, like, you know, a mixture of that. We're a sancocho of that. And that's why I love the word sancocho, because everywhere across Latin America, everybody has their version of sancocho, right? So when I created La Boriqueña, I was very clear that I wanted to address the lack of representation of Afro-Latinx in mainstream media and in our own media. I wanted to address the fact that Afro-Latinx oftentimes are erased. And I've grown up with my family having Afro-Latinx, many of my friends growing up Afro-Latinx, and their whole life it was, pero tú no pareces latino, tú no pareces boricua, tú no tienes que ser cubano, and it's just like, but what does that look like? And we perpetuate that to ourselves. So it's one thing to say, what does Hollywood expect? Caramba, let's look at ourselves. We do that to ourselves. I grew up with people, when I would start speaking Spanish, pero tú no hablas como un boricua, tú suena más como un cubano. And I'm like, what? So I'm like, because I have a bachelor's degree, automatically I lost my Puerto Rican identity. What kind of ignorance is that? You know? So when I created La Boriqueña, my goal with La Boriqueña was, I'm going to create an unapologetically patriotic superhero that will be introduced into mainstream popular culture. And that was bold as an independent publisher. I even though the base of La Boriqueña is majority Latinx, we immediately went mainstream. The first media outlets that covered La Boriqueña coming out were the New York Times, the Washington Post, Entertainment Weekly, CNN. Those were the media outlets. And we also published La Boriqueña at a time when Puerto Rico was going through an economic crisis, an $80 billion debt that created a humanitarian crisis with hundreds of public schools closing, hundreds of thousands of Puerto Ricanos fleeing the island because they didn't have work. And the ones that were fleeing this time were actually professionals, scientists, engineers, chemists, were not able to have a career in Puerto Rico because the pharmaceutical industry collapsed. So La Boriqueña was created in that space. So I'm like, I'm going to create a character that reflects the world that we live in right now. We are in the midst of a global climate crisis. And when you look at the Caribbean is a microcosmic example of how the world is witnessing and experiencing climate change. With the recent hurricane of Maria that hit on the Caribbean, particularly Puerto Rico, with the series of earthquakes, scientists for decades have been saying that we are long overdue for these major natural climactic disastrous events happening. So when I created La Boriqueña, I knew she was going to embrace her heritage. I knew she was going to embrace her culture and history. I knew she was going to be Afro-Latinx, and I knew she was going to address the climate change. So I tapped into Taino mysticism. The Tainos were the indigenous people of the Caribbean. And every comic book formulaically taps either into the Bible or the mythologies of the Greek, Roman books and stories that have been around for centuries, right? So we have our own that. Mexicans have their own mysticism and mythologies and history. Cubanos, Colombianos, and Puerto Ricans. So I said, look, we have that. In Puerto Rico, the Taínos, they believed in the mother goddess Atabex and her twin sons, and et cetera, in the hierarchy of these deities as well. So I said, her powers will therefore be drawn from the elements, from nature. And that's such a part of our nat and identity. You know, how many of us have plants in our homes? How many of us grow stuff? How many of us have grown up with family that have always grown stuff? We've always had a connection to nature, to the world. And in recognizing her power, I recognize something about being Latin. And this is something that all of us do. When we live in the United States, we don't, the majority of us, because I'm not going to act like all of us do this, but the majority of us, we don't come here and Martinez doesn't become Martin. Rodriguez doesn't become Roderick. If anything, we assert. Why? Because when we come to the United States, either as migrants, as Puerto Ricans, or as immigrants, as the majority of Latinx do, right? We're not accepted. If we're light-skinned Puerto Rican, if we're dark-skinned Mexican, if we're caramelo Colombian, we're not accepted. So instead of trying to continue to try to blend in and change our names and assimilate, we create our own barrios. We create our own economy. We create our own culture. This Chicano art scene has been around for decades that has inspired Latinx across the United States. There has been the creation of music, like salsa was created in New York City. That is a direct response of the oppression and the persecution that Latins have felt. And caramba, we're coming here like anyone else to kind of like, establish ourselves. We fought in wars. We don't get the decoration and acknowledgement. Puerto Ricans fought in World War I, and it took 80 years later, after they were court-martialed for merely being Puerto Rican, for them to get pardoned and their gold and their medals of honor. 80 years later, they get recognized for this. So, in creating a Boriqueña, I'm like, this is who we are. Yo no voy a cambiar mi nombre. Yo soy Edgardo Miranda-Rodriguez. And I'm not gonna call her star woman or flag girl. She's La Boriqueña. How do you pronounce that? Chill. I'll explain it to you. La Boriqueña. It's cool. If we could learn Vulcan, if we could learn Hobbit language, if we could learn all of these like boberia that people write in these novels, like you have freaking people at Star Trek conventions talking Klingon. It's like, you know what? Then you should learn a real living language with real people that are a part of this nation that help build this nation as well. And that's what La Boriqueña really represents. She represents that. And her powers come from the elements: superhuman strength, the ability to fly because she can control the weather. She can move and manipulate the earth. And then I created a whole storyline around her star, because the star in our flag they never really had any symbolism to it. It was just a star. So I created that to connect that to the Taino mythology as well as to the history of Puerto Rico. So a lot of the work that I do incorporates a lot of research, because my characters and her stories are not completely fantasy based. And so that's why my books are taught at universities across the United States, because I take the time to really address and bring to light a lot of history. Even as recent as last December, we distributed a special edition comic book to commemorate the 125th anniversary of the Puerto Rican flag, which was made in New York City. And people don't even know that. So the whole comic book was actually talking about that history. The fact that a song that many Puerto Ricans and Latins recognize, like Que Bonita Bandera, was actually a revolutionary protest song, because our flag was illegal to wave in Puerto Rico. So that's really what La Boriqueña is about. It's unapologetically Latin, it's unapologetically Afro-Latin and Boricua.
Qué bueno, congratulations on that. I mean, we could be here like 5 hours sipping some tea and talking the truth about a lot of the inner conflicts that we have as Latinos. And just a revelation, for me to look Mexican, I had to straighten my Afro hair and put on black straight hair extensions because people would not buy it. They're like, no, you're not Mexican. You're not Mexican. I will go to a casting session. Wait, are you Cuban? No, I'm from the south of Mexico.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. Can you speak Mexican? Sí. So, you know, there's so many things where we have to really, what I'm taking away is like, we have to really empower ourselves and do the due diligence, do your own research. And there's a lot behind these characters, right? That speaks to our soul and our integrity as community, right? So Edgardo, where can people, I'm going to start closing off this panel. Thank you so much, you guys. It's been incredibly thoughtful. It's been a lesson for me. I'm learning. So thank you for the patience. Edgardo, where can people follow you and your work?
You can go to our website, la-boriqueña.com. We're on Instagram, La Boriqueña Comics, on Twitter, La Boriqueña_GN. And if that's too hard, you can find our books on Amazon. I think you can find everything at Amazon these days, from a manguera to your sneakers. Everything's available at Amazon.
Amanda, Julina, where can people follow you?
I have Instagram and Twitter. It's at Amanda Julina.
Okay, perfect. Ralph?
You can follow me on Twitter at Henry Q Prod LLC. You can also find me on Instagram, Henry Q Productions LLC. And I also have a website at www.henryqproductionsllc.com. And you can also purchase my comics on indieplanet.com.
Perfect. Kayden?
So my Instagram is at Latina Superheroes, and the website is latinasuperheroes.com.
Sounds good. At Instagram? You say your Insta already?
Yeah, Instagram is Latina Superheroes as well.
Perfect. Barbara?
So you can find Fanbase Press at fanbasepress.com. We're on all of the social medias. Briefly, I'll just say that Quince is about a young teenager who gets superpowers on her quinceañera, but she only has them for the year that she's 15. You can find more information about the series, which is 15 issues, at quincecomic.com. There is an English language collected edition of the series, but we just last year during the pandemic put out a oversized hardcover collected edition of both the English language edition, and if you flip over the book, you get the entire Spanish language edition as well, with study guide, art gallery by wonderful Latinx creators, wonderful, lots of great bonus material. So that's also available all at quincecomic.com.
Excuse me, Barbara, for assuming you were with your kids, and then, you know, I omitted it from the conversation as a creator. I want to say thank you all so much. One common ground that I'm taking as a business owner is the financial fact of the lack of backing, right? Latinx creators, but also at the same time respecting their integrity and culture.
Absolutely.
So I'm looking forward to more conversations with you guys. Thank you all. Thank you, WonderCon, and we'll see you next time. Okay.
Take care, everybody.
Nos hablamos. Un beso.
Un abrazo.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.